Hey everyone, welcome back. I've just finished reading. Well, I say I've just finished reading. About 2 weeks ago now, I finished reading The Bell Jar by Syliva Plath. Syliva Plath, American poet, died at the age of 31, 32. Died, committed suicide, stuck her head in an oven, turned the gas on. That was in her home in London, because after studying in America, she came and she studied was she studying or was she teaching? I don't know, at Cambridge. Very prestigious institution, of course. Now, I knew that she was a poet, and I may have read some of her stuff when I was a teenager. And then I was in Waterstones in London, one of the big Waterstones, and I picked up The Bell Jar, which is the only novel she ever wrote. And on the back of it, one of the reviews said, "This is a perfect piece of art." And I thought, oh, now there's a good review, right? Um, and she is good. She was good. She was actually so good. When I first started reading her material or listening to her material, I got it on Audible, and it's read by someone Gyllenhaal, famous American actress, Maggie Gyllenhaal. There you go. Within about the first 10 minutes, I was blown away. Now you can't tell much of a story in 10 minutes. It's not about clever plot or anything. The way Syliva Plath wrote, her use of language is just boom. She was an artist with her words. I said to one of my friends, the first time, as a writer, as somebody who likes literature and somebody who writes, seeing or hearing or reading the work of Syliva Plath for the first time is like being a guitarist and hearing Van Halen for the first time. It's just wow. It's a completely different level. I mean, I remember some of the descriptions from her book, and they won't be verbatim, but things like, my words landed on her desk with all the effect of wooden nickels. I thought that was amazing. And then just the way she describes things. But this reminds me what Stephen King says about writing. He says, don't unnecessarily use adjectives. You should have done such a good job that the person can imagine the same for themselves. So some people like flowery descriptive language and everything, but I don't think it's necessary in telling a story to tell the story well. So I'd say Stephen King is very plot driven. You read his stuff and it's like having an easy conversation. Very rarely is there going to be a word you don't know what it means or anything like that. Syliva Plath doesn't use big words, but the words she used, just the descriptions, moving away from what Stephen King said, the descriptions and the analogies and everything are pure gold. They're just incredible. So yeah, as far as talent goes, I mean, she had it in spades. She had tons of it, but the story itself turns out it was quite biographical. It was based on her life, and when she eventually had it written, she had a lot of anxiety about getting it published because she didn't want any of the characters, of course all names changed, any of the characters upon in her book to offend the real life characters they were based upon. What is the bell jar? The bell jar, she says, is this thing that you see through and your vision is all distorted and everyone's underneath their bell jar. And it was on Audible. I wish I'd written down some of the quotes, but some of the lines she comes up with, they're like, wow. And maybe it takes a certain type of person to be affected by writing like that, but I don't think so. I think we make this mistake actually that we all think, everybody's so different, but no, we all have similarities. And that's one of the great things about the bell jar is you're reading it, and it doesn't seem crazy. I mean, this is a woman who spent time in mental institutions. It doesn't start off in a mental institution. The character spends time in mental institutions. She has shock therapy. I don't want to give too much of it away. You really just got to go and read it. But the way she describes it, you think, yeah, I can imagine that happening. And the turnaround, I mean, it starts with her thinking about these the Rosenbergs, these criminals who had been electrocuted by the state, and it just horrified her. She couldn't stop thinking what it must be like to burn from the inside out. And then she goes and has shock therapy. There's so many little things the way she wrote it, where A is presented first, and A says, well, this could never happen. This would be the worst thing that ever happens or anybody could ever do. And then in a perfectly understandable way, B, right, I'm going to do A now. It's incredible. Really talented as a writer. One of the best writers out there. I think the only other writer I'd rate as highly as Syliva Plath that I remember reading recently, I say recently, that's nonsense, about 20 years ago. The last writer that blew me away like that actually just kind of, made me, the Van Halen thing, when you first hear Van Halen, was Edgar Allan Poe. I remember Edgar Allan Poe's stories. I used to have them memorized. I'd read, not the whole damn stories, but the poems like The Raven. And I just thought, there's nobody who can write like this. This guy's just phenomenal. I mean, he just creates these worlds and the words he chooses. Now, Edgar Allan Poe had a humongous vocabulary, so you'd have to read his stuff with a dictionary. Not so with Syliva Plath. Maybe it's because 20 years later I've got a much better vocabulary. But the beautiful thing about writers like Poe and Plath is if there is a word they use, whether it's a word you understand or not, if you end up having to look it up, I would bet you that once you look it up and you understand it and you read the sentence again, you just go, amazing. That is not a word that's been chosen to show off the author's vocabulary. It's been chosen because it is the most accurate word to use in that scene to communicate that feeling or that message or that image. And there's a scene where in the bell jar where she pushes open a door and she just describes what the door looks like. And she's done enough work before then that just through the description of the door, literally, I was imagining vividly what the whole building looked like. It's incredible. She's dead, which is a shame. The really interesting thing about reading it or listening to it on Audible is that afterwards there's biographical notes. So that's where you figure out that it was biographical, autobiographical almost. She'd also been working on another book, which I don't think it ever got finished. I don't think it ever got published. But one thing I'm sure to do now is go out and get as much of Syliva Plath's writing as I can, because it should be studied. If you're a football fan and you really want to, I'm not a football fan, so I don't know where that came from. If you're a football fan and you really want to be a great footballer, you spend loads of time watching football matches. Oh, look at that skill, and look at that, and look at that, what they just did. It's the same with reading. If you're a writer, you want to be a writer, it's the same with people like Syliva Plath, people like Edgar Allan Poe. For me, in my opinion, you read it and you just think, my God, if I could do that, if I could do something like that, I'd be happy. I wouldn't have arrived, whatever arrived means, depending on the individual. Through the bell jar, arrive means killing yourself because everything's distorted. And then outside the bell jar, maybe it's an even worse situation and you want to go back under the bell jar. And you just got to read the book. Just get the book. Look, get the bell jar by Syliva Plath. It's not even that long. Read it or listen to it on Audible. And if you appreciate literature, if you appreciate writing, I reckon you'll love it. It really is incredible. So I don't want to talk too much about the plot in case you do read it. I don't want to give too much away. But go ahead and read it. All right? I hope you enjoyed that.